In today's My Hero Academia video we explain why Deku might have the quirk All for One. Also, only small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video, let's go! To understand the idea that Deku might already have the quirk All for One, we need to understand exactly the difference between One for All and All for One, and thus look at both quirks individually. My Hero Academia has proven many times that the essence of One for All is not completely understood by the Vestiges, Deku, or anyone who knows the quirk. Everything is based on mere assumptions. The All for One quirk allows the user to steal other people's quirks and use those stolen quirks as their own. It also allows the user to give stolen quirks to others. Another aspect of this ability is the mental connection to the previous user. This is similar how all the vestiges of One for All are integrated in One for All itself, which has resulted in Deku being able to communicate with previous users. All for One seems to grant access to a spiritual world similar to that of its counterpart One for All, and it even seems that the two spiritual worlds are connected, as was shown when Tomura tried to steal One for All from Deku. When this happened, the spiritual world of both quirks were temporarily connected. Also, we know that All for One responded to Deku's vision of the vestiges of One for All because he said he could sense his brother's presence, and the vestiges of One for All could sense the emotions of Shigaraki. This is all a strong indication of an unknown connection, and that is exactly the subject of this video. Why is there a connection? Is it perhaps a similar quirk? Or maybe even almost the same? So let's talk about One for All. A long time ago, All for One forced his seemingly quirkless younger brother to obtain the quirk Power Stockpiling. This ability allowed him to store energy in his body, but he already had an ability that allowed him to transfer his own quirk to another person. Apparently the transferring quirk and the Power Stockpiling quirk then merged into a new quirk called One for All. One for All is thus the transferable quirk that can be passed from one user to the next while storing power and quirks. In order for the quirk to be transferred, the recipient must take a sample of the predecessor's DNA. Also, the current owner must freely choose to transfer One for All, but it can also be transferred by force, as the recipient does not have to consent. To summarize, One for All and All for One are very similar. Both can transfer the quirk to another person, even by force. Both can use multiple quirks. Both have a spiritual world that is connected in a yet unknown way. The only difference we know so far is that One for All cannot steal quirks. Or is it possible? Maybe no one has ever tried this before. Could it be that simple? We will talk about this in a moment. The general assumption is that the Power Stockpiling quirk is responsible for adding the quirks, and the transfer quirk then allows the stored quirks to be transferred together. But here's the thing, the validity of this explanation is not officially confirmed. We just assume that this is the case, but in reality it is just speculation. What is really confirmed is the fact that the Power Stockpiling quirk allows to build up power, which was the first ability Deku learned to use, and literally the only ability All Might used all along. But we never got the explanation that the stockpiling quirk is the reason why One for All can stack all quirks. Now we come to a very popular theory in the My Hero Academia fandom. Assuming that the Power Stockpiling quirk really does have the ability to copy the user's quirk, then One for All should have a copy of All for One, since All for One passed the stockpiling quirk to his brother, just as his brother then passed it to the second user, and so on. But there's literally no evidence that this is actually the case, since All for One is not one of the vestiges of One for All, which would have to be the case if All for One really did pass on his quirk factor, as it happened to all the other users. This is quite a popular idea in the community, but there is no evidence that this is actually the case. However, putting aside the fact that there is no evidence to support this theory, and the reason why All for One has a connection to One for All is actually because All for One really passed on his quirk along with the stockpiling quirk, then Shigaraki should not be able to sense the realm of One for All vestiges, since he never passed on his own quirk along with the Power Stockpiling quirk. So One for All should not have a connection to Shigaraki, because Shigaraki's quirk factor is not part of One for All. However, this connection does exist. Before my partner Yami continues with this video, please take a moment to leave a like. Thank you.
Shigaraki can sense the realm of One for All, which suggests that both All for One and Shigaraki have this ability. But the only thing that they have in common is that they share All for One, so there is a possibility that some sort of connection exists between All for One quirk and the One for All quirk. So All for One most likely did not give a copy of his own quirk to Yoichi, but there was a connection between the two quirks from the beginning, which would explain the connection of the two realms. All for One and the first user of One for All are siblings, so this connection of the two quirks makes sense. How quirks are inherited is based on genetics. Here we have to mention that it looks like All for One is a first generation quirk user, because quirks are nonetheless a matter of genetics. And that turns out to be true, because All for One and his brother have similar abilities, meaning both can transfer their quirk to another person. This is definitely not a coincidence and speaks for the genetic connection. Even if Yoichi believed that transferring his own quirk was all he could do with his original quirk at the time, there is still a similarity and therefore raises the question of whether he could actually do more than that. We know Bakugo has said that One for All is technically like All for One, since Deku himself has multiple quirks. Even All Might agrees that this is the case. Deku then stares at his hands thinking All for One's power. Looking at this panel, it literally looks like a foreshadowing, as if Deku might one day be able to use All for One's ability. This leads us back to the origin of both quirks. If All for One had never found out that he could steal other quirks, he might have never found out that he had a quirk at all. But since his nature is true evil, it was possible for him to understand this ability immediately. Just didn't know everything about his own quirk, and because of his kind-hearted way of thinking, unlike his brother, he could never think of stealing someone else's quirk, and therefore he never realized that he could have such an ability to steal other quirks in the first place. The principle of stealing other people's quirks is a pretty evil thing, and considering that Yoichi didn't even know that he could transfer his own quirk to someone else, how would he ever figure out that he could steal other people's quirks? We know that One for All is based on doing good, so the focus is never on harming other people, which is associated to stealing other people's and thus automatically associated to the core of All for One. This may perhaps be why none of the users of One for All ever found out that they could actually steal quirks, because the very essence of One for All is to defeat All for One. The fact is that the One for All quirk is a big secret, although more and more is being discovered lately. For example, the Vestages have only recently discovered that there's a connection between All Might and his Vestage, with this Vestage knowing what All Might does, but not the other way around. Also, they have only recently understood why Deku will be the last user. This shows that there are many things that the users of One for All did not understand themselves, and therefore there is also a possibility that there is a hidden ability that no one knew about. To summarize, there is no proof that All for One passed on a copy of his quirk along with the power stockpiling quirk, but the fact that All for One's quirk has a connection to One for All's realm, even for Shigaraki, shows a direct connection between the two quirks. So we can assume that the One for All quirk may not be what it appears to be, and perhaps it can not only transfer quirks but also steal them. This plot would make a lot of sense for My Hero Academia, because it is likely that Deku would not try to kill All for One. That is just how he is. All Might didn't, and Deku won't either, but taking away all of All for One's quirk so that he is locked out forever as a normal human without any quirk would literally be the worst punishment imaginable for All for One. So that's it for today, folks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to smash the like button, and if you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe with the notification bell turned on. See you guys in the next video. Yami out.